"Don't you recognize me, cowboy? I'm your childhood love," said the Apache beauty. The dust of the frontier town swirled in the late afternoon heat, blurring the wooden storefronts into wavering silhouettes. A cowboy stood at the center of the street, hat pulled low, his hand resting near the worn handle of his revolver. He wasn't waiting for a duel, though he'd fought more than his share, but for the feeling in his chest to steady. The town always made him restless, like he didn't belong no matter how many years he wandered its roads. From the corner of his eye, he caught movement. A figure emerged from the haze, walking toward him with a grace both familiar and foreign. She stopped a few steps away, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that left him unsettled. Her skin was sun-kissed, her dark hair braided with feathers, turquoise stones and rawhide strands catching the light. Around her neck hung a pendant, the kind he had seen only once before. "Don't you recognize me, cowboy?" she asked, her voice carrying both softness and fire. "I'm your childhood love," she said, and the words struck him like a bullet he never saw coming. The cowboy's jaw tightened beneath his stubble. Memories he'd locked away clawed their way back to the surface. He saw himself as a boy, running barefoot along a riverbank, laughing beside a girl with eyes that caught the sun. She taught him the names of birds, the hidden paths through the woods. He had given her a small carved horse once, clumsy in shape but offered with sincerity. He remembered her laughter, how it made him feel like he belonged to something bigger than the world he knew. Then came the day of fire, when soldiers swept through her people's camp, branding them enemies, tearing families apart. He had hidden, too young and too powerless to stop it, but old enough to feel the shame of his inaction. He never saw her again. Until now, her eyes searched him, not for his face but for the boy she remembered inside it. He swallowed, his mouth dry, his voice barely a whisper. "It can't be, I thought you were gone." "Gone," she echoed, her lips curving into a bitter smile. "We do not vanish so easily, though many tried to make us. I carried your memory when I was forced into silence. And you," she stepped closer, her hand brushing the turquoise stone at her chest, "you carried mine, whether you admit it or not." He could smell the desert dust in her hair, hear the weight in her words. The distance of years collapsed between them, leaving only the raw edge of what was lost. He wanted to reach for her, to bridge that gap, but his hand froze midair. He was no longer the boy by the river. He was a man with blood on his hands, a wanderer who had buried his heart under too many layers of regret. "You've become a stranger," she said, though her voice trembled, betraying something softer beneath the accusation. "But I know the boy who carved a wooden horse still lives here." Her hand pressed lightly against his chest, where his heartbeat thudded heavy against her palm. For the first time in years, he let the silence settle between them without turning away. The past was not a story he could erase with whiskey or bullets. And standing before him now, in the dust-choked street of a town that never felt like home, was the one reminder of who he once was, the one piece of his soul he thought forever lost. He met her gaze fully, and the cowboy who had spent his life outrunning his ghosts realized there were some you weren't meant to outrun at all. The desert wind carried with it the smell of dust and sweat, rattling the old wooden signs above the saloon doors, whispering through the cracks in the weather-beaten shacks that lined the street. The cowboy kept his eyes fixed on her, trying to stitch together the girl from his memory and the woman standing before him. Time had carved sharper lines into both of them, but it had not erased the pull he felt in her presence. He knew her, down to the marrow, even if years and silence had turned them into strangers. She stood steady in the heat, adorned with leather and beads, turquoise glinting at her chest like a shard of the sky itself. The town around them went on with its noises, boots crunching, distant laughter, horses snorting, but for him, the world narrowed to the space between them. He could feel the weight of her words pressing against his ribs. Childhood love. He wanted to deny it, to protect himself from the truth, but he couldn't. The boy he had been had belonged to her, even if the man standing here no longer knew how to. "I thought you died," he said at last, the words breaking from him like dry earth crumbling under rain. Her dark eyes flashed, a storm barely restrained. "That's what they wanted you to think. That's what they wanted everyone to think. My people burned, yes, and bled. Families scattered like leaves in a storm. But some of us lived. I lived. And while you buried me in your memory, I carried you in mine." Her voice was not a cry of reunion. It was an accusation, each word a reminder that his silence had been as sharp as any soldier's blade. He flinched, but didn't turn away. He had run from guilt all his life, drowning it in whiskey, burying it under the endless miles of trail, the smoke of gunpowder, the clink of coins tossed across gambling tables. But here it stood in front of him, wrapped in beads and feathers, speaking with the voice of the girl who once made him carve animals out of driftwood by the river. "I was just a boy," he muttered, though even as he said it, the excuse tasted sour. "There was nothing I could have done." "You could have remembered me," she replied. The quiet in her tone was more cutting than any shout. "You could have come looking." The weight of her words pressed against his chest, squeezing the air out of him. He had thought of her. Yes, but always in passing, always as a ghost he couldn't bear to chase. He'd told himself she was gone, that chasing shadows would only break him further. But now, faced with the proof of her survival, he realized his choice had been less about helplessness and more about cowardice. "Why now?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why find me after all these years?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Because I want to know if the boy I loved is still in there, or if he died along with the rest of my people." The cowboy's hand twitched near his revolver, not out of threat, but habit, a reflex born from years of violence. It struck him then how much of his life had been shaped by that instinct, how little space it left for softer things. He wanted to tell her he was still that boy, that the river and the carved horse still lived inside him. But to say it outright felt like a lie. Too much blood had passed under his hands since then. "You don't know what I've done," he said quietly. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "And you don't know what I've survived." The air between them tightened, an invisible rope pulled taut by memory and pain. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she stepped past him, the scent of leather and smoke trailing in her wake. "Walk with me," she said without turning back. He hesitated. The street stretched ahead, its dust shimmering in the heat, its wooden storefronts sagging under the weight of years. Beyond it lay the open desert, vast and merciless. He wasn't sure if he had the strength to walk into either with her. But his boots moved anyway, carrying him beside her down the street. They walked in silence, their steps kicking up little swirls of dirt. Townsfolk paused to glance their way, whispering behind hands, curiosity sharp in their eyes. A cowboy with a woman like her. It was a picture that didn't fit neatly into the dusty frames of frontier life. He felt their stares pricking at his skin, but she seemed immune to them, her head high, her stride steady. At the edge of town, where the last shacks gave way to open sand and scrub, she stopped. The horizon stretched wide before them, the mountains faint in the distance. She turned to face him, her hair whipping across her face in the dry wind. "I came here because I heard your name whispered," she said. "Stories of the cowboy who carries guilt in his shadow. I knew it had to be you. And I wanted to see if you would remember me, or if you'd look at me like a stranger." He swallowed, his throat tight. "You're no stranger to me." "Then prove it," she said. "Prove the boy who carved me a horse still lives." The challenge burned between them. He didn't know how to answer, not with words. Words had failed him too often, had been drowned out by gunshots and the clatter of spurs. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his worn jacket. His fingers closed around something small, something he had carried for years without understanding why. When he pulled it out, the wooden horse lay in his palm, its edges worn smooth by time. Her breath caught. The turquoise pendant at her chest seemed to pulse in the sun, as if it remembered too. She reached for the horse with trembling fingers, her touch brushing against his hand. "You kept it," she whispered. "I tried to forget," he admitted, his voice cracking. "But I couldn't. Not really." Tears welled in her eyes, though she blinked them back with the strength of someone who had seen too much suffering to let it break her openly. She closed her hand around the little horse, clutching it as if it were a lifeline. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him, not the sharp pang of regret, but a thread of hope, fragile and trembling, weaving itself back through the ruins of his heart. The desert wind howled around them, carrying with it the ghosts of the past, but for once, he didn't feel like running. He felt like standing still, facing the storm with her beside him. And when she lifted her eyes to meet his again, he realized that maybe, just maybe, the boy who had carved her a horse still had a chance to live after all. The horizon stretched endless before them, and the heat pressed down like a heavy hand. The woman's fingers lingered around the carved horse, her thumb tracing the grooves worn smooth by years of being carried in a pocket, forgotten but never discarded. The cowboy watched her with the uneasy stillness of a man who had forgotten how to hope. The silence between them pulsed with memory. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, a saloon door slammed, and the faint clink of spurs echoed, but none of it touched them. He had seen shootouts, ambushes, and lawless towns where men bled into the dust, but nothing ever rattled him quite like this moment, standing in front of the only person who could undo him with nothing more than a look. Her voice came low, almost reverent, as though she spoke to the boy he had been, not the man standing before her. "Do you remember the river, cowboy? The one that cut through the canyon like silver?" The memory struck him raw. His mouth parted, but no words came. He saw it again. Sunlight scattered across the water, her laughter bouncing off the rocks, his bare feet splashing as he chased after her. He remembered how she taught him to weave reeds into little mats, how she whispered stories about the spirits that lived in the desert wind. He remembered carving the horse for her under a mesquite tree, his small hands clumsy, but determined. "I remember," he said at last, his voice hoarse. Her lips trembled, though she held herself steady. "That boy I loved lived by that river. He wasn't afraid of me. He wasn't afraid of who I was. And now I look at you, and I wonder if that boy's heart is still alive, or if it's buried beneath all the killing you've done." The cowboy's jaw tightened. He turned his gaze toward the mountains in the distance, their jagged peaks blurred by the shimmering heat. "Killing wasn't something I chose. It was the only way to survive." Her eyes didn't leave him. "Surviving isn't the same as living." The words landed heavy, and he felt the truth of them like a stone dropped into a well. He had survived more than most men. Wars between cattle barons, ambushes on outlaw trails, nights spent in the wilderness with only whiskey and the stars for company. But living, he wasn't sure he remembered how. She stepped closer, so close he could see the fine dust clinging to her skin, the sun painting fire along the strands of her hair. Her hand brushed the edge of his coat. "You kept the horse. Maybe that means the boy is still here. Maybe he's only been waiting." His throat worked as he swallowed. "Waiting for what?" "For me," she said simply. The cowboy's breath caught. The world around them seemed to fall away. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that all the years of wandering, of blood on his hands and weight in his chest, had been leading him back to this moment. But he also knew the world was cruel, and hope had a way of breaking harder than bullets. He shook his head. "You don't know what I've become. You don't know the things I've done." She tilted her chin, her eyes glinting like obsidian in the sun. "And you don't know what I've endured. You think your guilt makes you unworthy, but you forget, I carry scars too. I carry the ashes of my people. Do you think you can scare me with your darkness, when mine has been chasing me since the night soldiers set fire to our camp?" The cowboy's heart stuttered. He looked at her as if seeing her anew, not just as the girl from the river, not just as a ghost returned, but as a woman forged in fire and survival. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't here to be saved. She was here to demand truth. A memory broke through, unbidden. That night, he had been barely 12, crouched behind a mesquite bush as flames devoured the camp. He had seen soldiers dragging her people into the dirt, rifles cracking, women crying out. He had wanted to run to her, but his legs had been locked with fear. He remembered the sound of her voice screaming into the night, and the way silence followed, broken only by the crackle of fire. "I should have come back for you," he whispered, the words scraping raw out of him. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "You should have." The shame burned hotter than the desert sun. He dropped his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. His fists clenched at his sides, nails biting into his palms. For years he had told himself there was nothing he could have done, that he had been just a boy. But hearing her say it, hearing her confirm what he already knew, split him open. And then, gentle as the wind brushing across the canyon, her hand touched his cheek. He flinched, not from her touch but from the tenderness in it. "He didn't deserve it, but you didn't," she said. "And I am still here." He turned his face into her palm, closing his eyes. The touch grounded him, tethered him to the boy he had lost somewhere between the barrel of a gun and the bottom of a bottle. For the first time in years, he felt something that wasn't guilt or violence. He felt remembered. The moment stretched between them, fragile and alive. Then, from behind, the sound of heavy boots on the dirt shattered it. The cowboy's eyes snapped open, his hand instinctively going to his revolver. He turned to see 3 men stepping out from the shadow of the saloon, their movements slow, deliberate. Well, the tallest one drawled, spitting into the dust. "Ain't this something? Our little stray cowboy found himself company." The woman's hand dropped from his face, her body tensing. The cowboy shifted, placing himself just slightly between her and the men, his thumb brushing the hammer of his gun. "You boys got business with me?" he asked, his voice cold steel. The man grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Heard there's a price on your head, cowboy. Word is, bringin' you in pays enough to keep a man drunk for a year. Thought we'd see if it's true." The woman's eyes flicked to him, then back to the men. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her turquoise pendant glinting in the sun. The cowboy felt the old instincts settle over him, the ones that had kept him alive on too many dusty streets just like this. He measured the distance, the weight of his revolver, the twitch in the men's fingers. He could already see how it would play out. The draw, the gunfire, the bodies in the dust. He had lived this scene too many times. But this time, something was different. This time, she was here. And for the first time in his life, he found himself thinking not about surviving, but about what it would mean to keep living after the smoke cleared. He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, at the carved horse clutched tight in her hand. And he knew, whatever happened next, he couldn't go back to being the man he had been before she walked out of the desert. The cowboy's hand hovered above the revolver, his fingers twitching with the anticipation that had kept him alive through countless duels. The men advancing from the saloon swaggered with false confidence, but he knew enough to tell they weren't green. Their movements were slow, deliberate, wolves testing the distance before the strike. The woman at his side didn't move. She held her ground as though the threat of guns meant little to her, as though her spirit had been tempered by flames far hotter than any bullet could burn. He could feel her presence steadying him, a weight against the wind threatening to scatter him to dust. The tallest of the 3 tilted his head, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. "You gonna make this easy, cowboy? Or we do it the hard way?" The cowboy's voice came calm, low, like the rumble before a storm. "You come for me, you better be ready to die." The words hung in the air, heavy and certain. The outlaws shifted uneasily, but pride drove them forward. The cowboy had seen it too many times, men thinking a price on another man's head was worth more than the risk of their own lives. Pride always made corpses. His hand twitched, then froze. "Not yet." Then froze. "Not yet." He breathed in the dust, the heat, the faint scent of her skin carried by the wind. And then everything snapped into motion. The outlaw's hand went for his gun, but the cowboy's revolver cleared leather first. The crack of gunfire split the silence, thunder rolling through the street. One man dropped, clutching his chest, blood soaking the dirt. Another staggered back, shot clean through the shoulder, his weapon clattering uselessly to the ground. The third, quicker than the rest, fired wild. The bullet tore past the cowboy's arm, grazing flesh, the sting sharp but shallow. He ignored the pain, steady as stone, and fired again. The third man fell face first into the dust, stillness claiming him. Silence returned, broken only by the ringing in his ears. The townsfolk who had gathered on porches scattered back into doorways, muttering, peering through cracks in the wood. Gunfights were no novelty here, but death always carried its own gravity. The cowboy exhaled, lowering his revolver. The blood on his sleeve was already darkening, the burn of the graze sharp against his skin. He turned to her. She hadn't moved. Her eyes were fixed on him, not with fear, but with something heavier, recognition, maybe even sorrow. "You didn't hesitate," she said softly. He slid the revolver back into its holster, his jaw tight. "Hesitation gets you killed." Her gaze didn't waver. "And it keeps you from living." The words cut deeper than the bullet had. He wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't understand the kind of world he lived in, but he knew she did. She had survived worse. She had watched her world burn and still stood before him, unflinching. He flexed his injured arm, wincing. She stepped closer, her hands moving with practiced care as she tore a strip of cloth from her own garment. Without asking, she wrapped it around his arm, the fabric tight, her fingers steady. He watched her, the gentleness in her touch clashing against the violence that had just unfolded. "You carry death like it's second nature," she said, her eyes never leaving the wound she bound. "But you carry me too. That's what I came to remind you." His throat tightened. "And if I don't know how to carry both?" Her hands stilled for a moment, pressing against the cloth. Then she looked up at him, her eyes burning with quiet fire. "Then learn." The cowboy drew in a shaky breath. The simplicity of her words shook him more than any gunfight ever had. He had spent years learning to draw faster, to shoot straighter, to walk away from graves without looking back. But what she asked of him now was harder. To learn how to live again. To remember the boy by the river and let him breathe beneath the weight of the man he'd become. He nodded once, a silent promise he wasn't sure how to keep. The woman tightened the bandage, then released his arm. "Come," she said, her voice softer now. "There's a place I want to show you." They left the bodies cooling in the dust, the stares of townsfolk trailing them like shadows. He didn't look back. He followed her out of town, into the desert where the horizon stretched unbroken and the wind whispered through the sagebrush. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of amber and crimson. She led him off the beaten path, through narrow gullies and across dry creek beds, her steps sure and unhesitant. She walked as though the desert itself guided her. As twilight settled, they reached a canyon where the walls rose high and the air cooled with evening. A small spring bubbled at the base of the rock, its trickle carving a silver ribbon into the earth. She knelt beside it, cupping water in her hands, drinking deeply before looking back at him. "Do you remember this place?" she asked. He knelt too, his reflection wavering in the water. Slowly, memory stirred. He did remember. The spring at the edge of the canyon, where they had once come as children to escape the heat. Where he had carved the horse. Where he had first felt what it meant to belong. "I remember," he whispered. She reached into the pouch at her waist, pulling something wrapped in worn leather. Carefully, she unwrapped it to reveal a feather, charred at the edges but still vibrant in its center. She held it out to him. "This was all I saved the night of the fire," she said. "A feather from my father's headdress. It reminded me that even when flames take everything, something can survive." He looked at it, then at her. "And you're giving it to me?" Her gaze softened, though her voice stayed steady. "No, I'm sharing it, just as you shared the horse. It means we carry each other's pasts now. No more running." The cowboy took the feather, his hand trembling slightly. He tucked it carefully into the inside of his coat, where the horse had lived for so long. The weight of it settled against him, a reminder not just of her survival but of his responsibility. The stars began to bloom overhead, scattered diamonds in the vast dark. The cowboy lay back on the cool stone, staring upward, feeling the earth beneath him, the desert breathing around him. She sat beside him, her silhouette sharp against the starlight. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was something else, something alive, like the hush of the river at night. Finally, he turned his head toward her. "What now?" he asked. Her lips curved in the faintest smile, a flicker of light in the shadows. "Now, cowboy, we find out if you can learn to live." And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he let himself believe that maybe he could. The night in the canyon deepened, the stars wheeling overhead in vast silence. The cowboy lay on the stone, listening to the steady rhythm of the spring as if it were the heartbeat of the desert itself. Beside him, she sat upright, her knees drawn close, her braid resting against her shoulder, the turquoise pendant glinting faintly in the starlight. Sleep didn't come easy to him, and he doubted it would ever come easy again. Too many nights spent half awake, waiting for the scrape of boots outside a tent, the whistle of a bullet in the dark. But here, for the first time in years, the quiet wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. "You never told me your name," he said at last, his voice low. "Not the one the world calls you. The one you carried when we were children." Her eyes softened. "Naya," she said. "It means renewal." The name filled him with something he hadn't felt in years, a strange, aching warmth. "Naya," he repeated, tasting the syllables like a memory restored. "I used to call you, little bird." A smile ghosted across her lips. And you were the boy who wanted to fly but didn't know how. The words struck him deeper than she could know. He turned his gaze upward, where the stars stretched endless. I never did learn. Maybe you just needed the right wings, she said. Silence fell again, but this time it was gentle, not weighted. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since he was a boy, he let himself drift into sleep with someone else keeping watch. When dawn came, the desert glowed gold, the air crisp with morning. He woke to find Naya already standing at the spring, her hands lifted as she whispered words he didn't understand. Her voice carried the cadence of prayer, of ritual older than the town they'd left behind. He sat up slowly, watching her with a reverence he didn't know he still possessed. When she finished, she turned to him. We have to move. Others will come, like those men in town. Word of blood travels fast. He nodded, rising to his feet. His body ached from the fight, from the wound at his arm, but the ache felt lighter somehow, as though shared. He saddled his horse, and she mounted hers, a lean mare with a coat like night. Together, they rode out of the canyon and into the open desert. The land stretched around them, vast and merciless, but there was beauty too, sunlight scattering across sandstone, hawks circling overhead, the whisper of sage carried on the breeze. For hours they rode in silence, their shadows stretching long across the earth. As the sun climbed higher, she spoke. When I was taken from the fire, they sent me far from home. To a place where the language was not mine, where they tried to strip me of who I was. I learned to stay silent, to hide my stories, but the silence only made me remember more. He listened, his throat tightening. I never knew, he said. You didn't ask, she replied, but her tone wasn't cruel, it was simple truth. The words cut nonetheless. He thought of all the years he had spent running from the memory of her, convincing himself she was gone. He had filled the silence with violence, with whiskey, with endless roads. And all the while, she had been carrying both her pain and his memory alone. What kept you alive? He asked. Her hand brushed the turquoise pendant at her chest. Hope, that one day I would see someone who remembered me. That I wasn't lost to the world. She glanced at him, her eyes steady. And now here you are. The cowboy felt the weight of her gaze, heavier than any outlaw's rifle. I don't know if I deserve to be, he admitted. Deserving has nothing to do with it, Naya said. You're here. That's enough. They rode on until the sun dipped westward, painting the desert in long shadows. By evening, they reached a grove of cottonwoods clustered around a dry wash. The air cooled, and they made camp. A small fire crackled between them, its smoke curling into the twilight. Naya sat across from him, the firelight dancing across her face. She held the carved horse in her hands, studying it as though it held secrets. Do you know why I love this? She asked. He shook his head. Because it was yours, she said simply. It was the first thing someone gave me that wasn't out of pity or duty. You carved it because you wanted me to smile. And I did. He swallowed hard, his chest tight. And I lost it all when I lost you. Her gaze met his, unwavering. You didn't lose me. You just stopped looking. The fire popped, sparks spiraling upward into the night. He had no answer. The truth of her words pressed into him, sharp as a blade. He had stopped looking because it was easier. Because the pain of hope was worse than the finality of grief. I want to make it right, he said, his voice rough. Her head tilted, eyes searching his face. You can't bring back what was burned. But you can walk forward without turning away again. The cowboy nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the vow settle over him. The days that followed blurred into rhythm. Long rides through sun-scorched valleys, quiet nights by small fires, the silence between them growing less heavy, more alive. She taught him words from her language, the names of stars and plants he had never known. He told her stories of the trails he had ridden, the men he had fought, though his voice carried shame more than pride. One night, under a sky thick with stars, she looked at him and said, You carry death like a second skin. But I see the boy still. He's in the way you laugh when the horse nudges your hand. He's in the way you look at the horizon, as if you're waiting for something more. He turned his face toward her, the firelight flickering in his eyes. And you, what do you see when you look at me? Her answer came without hesitation. I see the boy I love. And I see the man he's becoming. Maybe he doesn't know how to live yet. But he's trying. The cowboy's chest tightened. He wanted to reach across the fire, to take her hand, to anchor himself in the truth of her words. But he held back, afraid of breaking the fragile thread between them. The desert gave them no mercy, but it gave them time. And with every mile, every night spent under the stars, he began to feel the stirrings of something he thought long dead. Not just love, not just hope, but life itself, raw and unsteady, clawing its way back through the ashes. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the cliffs in fire, he spoke. "Naya, if I asked you to stay with me, would you?" She turned to him, her eyes soft but unwavering. "I didn't come to stay, cowboy. I came to see if you would walk beside me. My path is not behind me, and neither is yours. But for now, they run together." Her words filled him with both ache and relief. He didn't know how long their paths would cross, or where they would lead. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was walking alone. And that was enough. The desert nights stretched long and star-filled as Naya and the cowboy rode side by side, their shadows mingling in the pale light of the moon. He had lost count of the days they traveled, though it hardly mattered anymore. Each sunrise brought another stretch of earth, another chance to ride with her close enough that he could hear the rhythm of her breath, steady and sure. Yet even as the miles unfolded, he knew shadows still rode behind them, shadows of the men he'd killed, of the bounty whispered across saloons, of the past neither of them could outrun forever. One morning, they came upon an abandoned homestead, its walls bleached by sun, its door hanging loose. Naya dismounted first, her hand brushing across the wood as if listening to what the place remembered. "A family once lived here," she said softly. "Now it's just bones." The cowboy tied his horse and followed her inside. Dust lay thick on the floorboards. A child's toy sat forgotten in a corner, carved of wood not unlike the little horse he had given her years ago. He picked it up, turning it in his scarred hands. "This land doesn't keep much," he murmured. "It keeps stories," Naya replied, her gaze on the toy. "If someone remembers them." Her words lingered with him as they camped that night in the shell of the homestead. When he lay awake on the floorboards, staring at the rafters, he wondered what story his life told. Was it only blood and running? Or could it be more, now that she had returned? The next day, they reached a river valley where willows bent low over the water. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. He knelt to wash the grime from his face, and Naya joined him, cupping water into her hands. They sat together, quiet, until she said, "There is something you must know." His chest tightened. "What is it?" "When the soldiers came, when they set fire to my home, I thought I had lost everything. But I was not alone. A child was hidden that night, my brother. I have been searching for him ever since." Her eyes burned with quiet determination. "The whispers I followed to find you were the same whispers that told me he might still live." The cowboy drew in a sharp breath. He thought of the soldiers, the chaos, the years of wandering. A child could vanish into the dust, swallowed by orphan trains, taken to missions, bent into someone else's world. "Do you think you'll find him?" he asked. Her voice did not waver. "I must." He studied her face, the fire that had carried her through survival. In that moment, he understood. She wasn't just a reminder of his past. She was the future he had never dared to believe in. If she carried hope, then maybe he could too. "We'll find him," he said, the words rough but certain. Together, they set out with renewed purpose, following scraps of rumor, whispers of a boy taken north, sold into labor on a ranch. The trail was uncertain, the kind that could vanish with one hard wind, but Naya's resolve carried them forward. Yet danger followed, as he knew it would. In a dusty border town, they walked into a saloon to ask questions, and the air shifted the moment his boots crossed the threshold. Men turned to look. Cards froze mid-deal. A familiar tension gripped the room, one he had lived through too many times. "Cowboy," a voice drawled from the corner. "Heard tell of you. Heard you left bodies in your wake down south. Heard there's gold for the man who brings you in." The cowboy's hand hovered near his revolver. Naya stood tall beside him, her turquoise pendant catching the lamplight. "I don't want trouble," he said, though his voice was iron. But trouble didn't care what a man wanted. The first shot rang out before words could finish, hanging in the air. The cowboy drew faster than thought, his gun roaring as men dove for cover. Smoke filled the saloon, glass shattered, and when it cleared, 3 men lay bleeding on the floorboards. The survivors scattered into the night. Breathing hard, the cowboy looked at Naya. She hadn't flinched, but her eyes held something heavier than fear, sorrow. "How many more, cowboy?" she asked quietly. He holstered his gun, shame clawing at his throat. "As many as it takes to keep you safe." She shook her head. "You don't see. It isn't me you're keeping safe, it's yourself. Every man you kill ties you tighter to the life you say you want to leave behind." The truth cut deep. He had spent so long surviving by the gun that he didn't know if he could lay it down. Yet he saw the hurt in her eyes, and he knew, if he didn't change, he would lose her. They left the town before dawn, the bodies cooling behind them. For miles, they rode in silence. Finally, Naya broke it. "When we find my brother, you'll have a choice to make. Keep walking the path of blood, or choose another." Her words haunted him long after she spoke them. That night, he dreamed of the river where they had played as children. In the dream, the water was red, and the wooden horse floated downstream, carried beyond his reach. He woke with a start, sweat chilling his skin. Days turned into weeks as they followed the trail north. At last, in a small settlement tucked against the mountains, they found him. A boy of 12, lean and wary, working the stables of a rancher who saw him as little more than property. Naya dismounted and approached slowly, her hands open, her eyes full of tears. "Little brother," she whispered in their native tongue. The boy froze, eyes wide, then broke into a run. She caught him in her arms, holding him as if the world might tear him away again. The cowboy watched, his throat thick, as brother and sister clung to each other beneath the wide sky. For the first time in his life, he felt something close to grace. But grace never came without a price. The rancher, a hard-faced man with a rifle across his shoulder, stepped out of the barn. "That boy's mine," he said flatly. "Bought and paid for." Naya rose, her hand gripping her brother's. "He is not yours. He never was." The cowboy stepped forward, his revolver heavy at his side. "Best you let him go," he warned. The rancher's lip curled. "You think he'll just hand over property? You think the law'll side with a half-breed woman and a wanted killer?" The cowboy's hand tensed, ready to draw, but then he felt Naya's gaze on him, steady, pleading. Not with fear, but with hope. She wanted another way. His breath shuddered. He had always reached for the gun, always chosen death, but now, with her watching, with the boy staring wide-eyed, he saw another path. Slowly, deliberately, he let his hand fall from the revolver. "You're right," he said to the rancher. "Law won't side with us. But men have a way of making their own justice. What's a boy's freedom worth to you?" The rancher blinked, thrown off balance. "Worth." The cowboy pulled the leather pouch from his coat, the last of the gold he carried from years of wandering. He tossed it at the man's feet. "More than that boy's chains." The rancher crouched, opened the pouch, eyes gleaming at the sight of coin. Greed won where cruelty might have stood firm. He spat into the dust. "Take him. He ain't worth near that much." The cowboy's chest loosened as Naya pulled her brother close, relief spilling across her face. For once, blood had not been the price. That night, by the fire, Naya looked at him with something new in her eyes. Not just gratitude, not just love, but belief. "You chose life," she said. "For him, for yourself." He met her gaze, his heart unsteady. "For you," he whispered. In the weeks that followed, they rode with her brother between them, teaching him the names of stars, the songs of rivers, the strength of family restored. The cowboy felt the weight of the gun at his side, but he no longer reached for it first. He began to believe in the boy he once was, the boy who carved a horse by the river, the boy who could still live inside the man. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, Naya placed the carved horse back into his hand. "You gave this to me once, to say I was not forgotten. Now I give it back, to say the same of you. You are not lost, cowboy. Not anymore." His fingers closed around it, and tears burned his eyes. He looked at her brother, at the life he never thought possible. For the first time in decades, he felt whole. The desert wind rose, carrying with it the scent of sage, the promise of rain. He lifted his face to it, breathing deep. And when he turned back to her, He smiled, a real smile, born not of survival but of living. "Let's go home," he said. And together, they rode into the horizon, not as ghosts of the past, but as souls reborn, carrying love, memory, and the unbroken promise of a life still waiting to be lived. Thank you so much for watching this story till the very end. Your support means more than words can ever say. If you felt the depth of this journey, don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll keep bringing powerful stories to life, and your presence here makes all the difference.